Welcome to Conducting a Cognitive Symphony, a new Procurious podcast series. Hi there, I'm Philip Eidson, the host of Conducting a Cognitive Symphony, a 5-part procurement podcast series sponsored by IBM. And there's many factors that require careful consideration to bring about effective cognitive solutions. It's really akin to conducting a group of musicians. It may be possible, even easy, to attain a pleasant sound from a solo instrument. But when expertly managed, you can accomplish a symphony from an entire orchestra. And this week, Procurious and IBM are taking you through the 5 steps to conducting a dazzling cognitive symphony, from building your orchestra to getting the brass on board and orchestrating your melody. And on day 5, the Conductor, I'm joined by Peter Hrabowski, Analytics and Automation Lead for IBM Procurement. And today being the last in the podcast series, I wanted to bring together all the elements of the orchestra and talk strategy. And so in my first question, I asked Peter, how important is it to have a single data strategy across procurement?
Yeah, so it's very important in today's world because as we all experience, data is getting generated in a very fast manner, and there is a growing need for consuming that data almost at the same time when the data gets generated. Mm-hmm. And without having the right data strategy or comprehensive data strategy in place that covers the entire life cycle of the data, then businesses may face some issues very quickly, like they will not have an understanding of what data they acquire, where that data is, and what business value that data provides to them. That's why it's really important to build and execute a data strategy that really covers the acquisition of the data, the transformation and the curation of the data, as well as the consumption of the data, and kind of enabling the procurement end users as well as other business users to have a trusted source for procurement related data.
Yeah, how we talk about a data strategy and having a single data strategy. You know, when you think about that, do you think about it as in procurement data or data that procurement can access in its entirety? Or are you thinking as much just one part? So let's say a strategy around spend data or a strategy around market insight data. Can there be separate strategies, or do you encourage leaders to really think about it holistically?
Based on our experience at IBM and also the practice that we are following is really we handle all these different areas of procurement data as a whole. So really it's a holistic approach. Mm-hmm. Because you can't really separate the various elements of procurement data from each other, because everything is really interconnected and related to each other. So really you need to have an approach where you are not just trying to address one piece of the puzzle, but the entire one.
Now, does this feed, or does this typically, do you see that it feeds into a corporate data strategy of which procurement just becomes a subset?
Yes, definitely. So there are lots of similarities and synergies between procurement data strategy and the corporate data strategy. Likely, if a corporate data strategy exists, then it covers a pretty significant portion of what a procurement data strategy would need to cover, because at the end it's really just data, but with some specifics for procurement. Mm-hmm. The good thing is that really if there is a corporate data strategy, procurement can adapt to it. For example, the data governance is definitely something that procurement does not need to invent new things, because that's likely covered by the corporate data strategy, and procurement just needs to really apply those practices there. But this also allows procurement, for example, really focusing on those things that are specific for procurement. And let me give you an example here. Is really today buyers may not think about how important it is for them to ask for the right data from the suppliers.
Yeah.
This may need to be part of really the negotiation process, because suppliers may not think that it's important for the buyer. And this would require some process changes in procurement, and the procurement data strategy could really focus on these parts and then really developing the right approach for the business processes.
Yeah, one of the things I think of as well is, as an example in the invoicing, or let's say the outcome of what I'm trying to achieve is good spend data, good spend visibility. But a lot of the inputs that come from how you categorize an invoice or what information you take from an invoice actually helps you determine how to classify and how to categorize certain data. And those are things that they're not necessarily, sometimes accounts payable falls under procurement, but most of the time that's a different function. So we have to be working with external partners in the business to help them adjust their data strategies so that it actually helps us get the outputs that we ultimately need.
So invoice data is definitely something that procurement is relying on to get better insights about spend. And it's not just really invoices. In general, I agree with you that procurement really needs external data for being able to do more advanced insights and analytics. But this can even come from the supplier as well. So we don't necessarily need to think about, market intelligence. Recently, we finished a project about car lease. We worked together with our car lease suppliers to get some additional data about our fleet, like, mileage information, car type, fuel type, and so on and so on. And this is something that the suppliers can easily provide, but no one really considered this as an important thing previously. But now that we kind of build the proof of concept for this solution, that's going to be definitely something that our buyers will consider in the future together from the suppliers.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to say here is really procurement is dependent on others for getting the data, but still procurement can do a lot itself to gather the right data, because procurement really has the influence here.
Yeah, we shouldn't be completely reliant or hold our hands up and say we can't get the information that we need because it's out of our control.
Exactly.
So as we start to wrap up this podcast series, I'd love if you could just share some of the critical success factors that, we should all be considering when we pull together a cognitive and analytic strategy.
So one would be definitely the data acquisition process. And many may think that this is only about IT and technology, but as I mentioned previously, this is much more about business processes, really changing the way how we approach the data acquisition. We should not just rely on the IT technical data management teams to get the data for us, but also the buyers need to understand why it's important to get additional data and how it can help them to generate additional savings, build better relationships, supplier network, and so on. So this would be really one. Another one, based on our experience, is really the data governance. I touched with that this should be fully aligned with the corporate data governance processes. But what we experience is really without the proper data governance, things can get easily out of control. We will not trust our spend figures, we will not trust our transaction numbers, and so on if we don't have the right governance in place. And the last one is really about the organization. So what we experienced and when things change significantly, was when our CPO assigned a dedicated data officer for procurement.
Yeah.
And really the data officer's role is to build the data strategy and ensuring that this strategy is consistently followed across the organization. And using this setup, we can really deliver the right solutions using data, cognitive, and analytics for our procurement practitioners.
Now, in having a single point of contact, a chief data officer, for smaller organizations, is it still important that even if they can't carve out that role as an individual job in itself, that there's really a single person who has accountability and responsibility for data, even if it's, part of a broader remit that they have?
Right. That is how we would suggest to set up really a dedicated person, not necessarily a full-time person, but ideally, yes. And the data officer can be supported by, data stewards, data management, data engineers. It's really up to the organization how they want to set up, but for us it worked out very well.
I have a last question. It's more on the technology side, because I think, we tend to rely on the tools of how we actually access information, how it's presented to us, and often think that if we don't have access to the technology that we might want, that's going to make things really difficult for us. And what's the benefit in us even starting? But in your opinion, is the tools that we use, to visualize data, for example, are they really that important? Or is it more around kind of some of the things you talked about before in gathering and collecting and having consistent processes that really have the biggest impact?
I think the tool and technology is still important to have really a seamless user experience, easy navigation, and possibility for customization. But I think we really need to seek for simplicity here and try to limit the technologies we try to use if possible. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, as you just summarized very well, the things behind are more important to making sure that we really have a single source of truth, and we ensure that what we deliver is really meaningful and providing value to the practitioners, not necessarily the technology that we use for delivering it.
Thanks for listening to Day 5 of Conducting a Cognitive Symphony, sponsored by IBM. Head on over to Precurious.com for additional content on our blog and to contribute questions or comments via our discussion board. And you can also download Marco Romano's white paper, What Are the Success Factors in Cognitive and Analytic Strategies and Adoption, via IBM.com.